in and gear out, American highways are alive with motorists touring the length and breadth of their own vast country. And today, more and more Americans are heading south, down the Pan-American Highway into Mexico. Of the million-odd U.S. tourists who have rolled down the Pan-American Highway in the 10 years since it was opened, few have any knowledge of the land and its people above the guidebook level. To travelers from the U.S., points of interest. Many of the more venturesome go to marvel at Paricutín, the baby volcano which 3 years ago suddenly broke into eruption and grew up out of an astonished farmer's cornfield. Standard for all tourists is a glimpse of one of Mexico's numerous religious celebrations. In these, there still survive many of the ancient rites of the Aztecs, Mayans, and other Indian peoples who lived in Mexico before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores. But Mexico's tragic history, the effects of 300 years of corrupt Spanish rule, the successive struggles which brought independence but little betterment to the poverty-stricken Mexican people, all this is of far too little interest to the ordinary U.S. tourist. What most vacationists want is plenty of local color, well diluted with modern conveniences. And it is in Mexico's capital, center of tourism, that they find them in the most agreeable proportion. With enough of the new to look familiar and enough of the old to look foreign, Mexico City annually attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists who look for little other than the same amusements they enjoy at home. In the nightclubs of the capital, pleasure seekers who may have raced all the way from the border without getting to know a single Mexican seek shelter with other tourists in gilded surroundings, indistinguishable from those they frequented in any U.S. metropolis. Throughout their stay, such gadabouts manage to remain thoroughly insulated from any understanding of the country or its people.
So it surprises you, senorita, that I am a Mexican?
Why, Mexicans are sinister characters who wear sombreros and fight revolutions and things. Anyone would take you for an American.
Senorita, please. I am an American, a North American by geography, but I am a Mexican by nationality, and very, very proud of it.
Behind all the travel folder facade, there exists the real Mexico, a land and a people still in the throes of a 36-year social upheaval. First of the great social revolutions of our time, it began in 1910, overthrowing the old strongman Porfirio Diaz, who for 30 years had exploited Mexico and sold out its resources to foreigners. Many men helped shape the revolution: the well-meaning Madero, who supplanted Diaz, the lusty bandit Pancho Villa, and Zapata, the idealist. President followed president, some of them dictators like Carranza and Calles, a few honest and devoted like Obregón. None of them had succeeded in doing much to help Mexico's people when Lázaro Cárdenas became president in 1934. Cárdenas found his country virtually a private preserve of rich Mexicans and foreign industrialists. Over 9/10 of its subsoil wealth, including its big oil resources, were controlled by foreign interests, chiefly American and British. Profits from these industries were steadily drained away from Mexico, and foreign industrialists and investors were able to exert financial pressure, which sometimes made them more powerful than the Mexican government itself. Wealthy landowners, or hacendados, who represented a tiny fraction of the people, still held over 90% of Mexico's productive soil. On these great farms, the peasants who had always fought their country's battles, done its humblest work and lived the hardest lives, reaped perpetual poverty and debt in return for perpetual labor. Of all the population groups in Mexico, the peon had been promised the most and given the least. Once in office, President Cárdenas lost no time in tackling anew the almost hopeless task of making good the promises of the revolution. Acting upon the Constitution of 1917, he ordered great haciendas broken up by surveyors into the small communal farms, or ejidos, traditional in ancient Mexico. Demonstrators were sent out by the government to cooperative farms to teach peasants how to operate machinery in place of the crude tools which had been in use from the time of their ancestors. To make more land productive, dam building and irrigation projects were launched by the government. But not more than an estimated 15% of Mexico's soil could grow useful crops, even though it were artificially watered. To raise the people out of ignorance, Cárdenas embarked on an educational program by which he hoped eventually to give every Mexican child a chance to learn at least the 3 R's. During the 6 years of his administration, thousands of new schools were built, but even these were not enough. Traveling the country from end to end, meeting the peasants and listening to their troubles, Cárdenas became the idol of his people. Then, given strength by his immense popularity, he took his boldest step. Acting on the Constitution, which vested all of Mexico's subsoil rights in the state, Cárdenas sent government agents to appraise and expropriate the holdings of the foreign oil companies. Though this move cost Mexico heavy losses in oil revenues and brought strong protests from U.S. and British interests, Cárdenas refused to give ground, and in the eventual settlement, foreign economic domination over Mexico received its first major setback. By such measures, Cárdenas aroused in his people a new sense of pride and independence, but concrete results in improved living standards were still few as he reached the end of his term. To succeed him, there stepped into office in 1940 a political moderate, Manuel Ávila Camacho. As he took over, the new president was hailed as a man with a middle-of-the-road position, likely to slow down the tempo of reform and consolidate the gains of his predecessor. But the course of Ávila Camacho's administration was to be altered before it got well underway, with the spread of war to the Western Hemisphere. As Mexico declared war on the Axis, its people found themselves fighting not against the United States, which they had so long feared, but side by side with it. Mexico began gearing its industrial resources to the far greater establishment for war production the United States was building, and under the direction of a joint U.S. and Mexican Economic Commission, made important contributions to the common war effort. In return for the use of Mexican materials, the U.S. pledged itself to aid in Mexico's industrial development, not only during the war, but afterwards as well. Mexico's mines steadily increased their output of such strategic metals as zinc, lead, copper, manganese. Under the stimulus of war, Mexico expanded its consumer goods industries and met all commitments to the Allies. Carrying out U.S. policy, Ambassador George Messersmith substituted for the old economic imperialism, once a source of bad feeling, a new spirit of economic cooperation. In return, Mexico's able foreign minister, Ezequiel Padilla, more than lived up to his obligations as a good neighbor. Cooperation was equally close on the industrial level. Mexico welcomed the arrival of a mission of U.S. railway experts to superintend the immense job of rehabilitating its inadequate transportation system. Out of repair, after years of misuse and neglect, Mexico's railroads had not only been a handicap in its struggle toward economic progress, but had severely hampered the initial stages of the war effort. In rebuilding them, the Mexicans received technical advice, training, and equipment from which they will profit for years. a period of industrial expansion came to Mexico. A once backward agrarian country was moving forward into the modern world. At the war's end, the Mexican people could count many concrete gains for their country. It had grown greatly in military and industrial strength. It had achieved better relations with its neighbors, both to the north and south. It had won a new and respected position in the world, symbolized by its membership in the Security Council of the United Nations. The Mexico City of today is a boom-time capital. Signs of affluence are more marked than at any time since the lush days when Diaz and his politicians were squandering the nation's wealth. But in this prosperity, Mexico's common people still have little share. To them, the gains war brought have as yet scant meaning in the terms they understand: security and decent living. Today, all the hopes and aspirations of Mexico's long-suffering common people for material betterment are pinned on the continuation of their economic revolution. On this revolution, any political party seeking popular support must base its platform. The Acción Nacional, which attacks it openly, remains a minority party of the rich and reactionary. The mysterious Sinakista movement, which has lost ground since the war, would divert the revolution into strongly clerical and fascist channels. The Communist Party, no longer the power it once was, seeks to make it more drastic and turn Mexico into a totalitarian anti-clerical state like Russia. But by far the most important party is PRI, the political machine of the revolution, which, under different names, has remained in power for 17 years. PRI would keep the revolution what it is, mildly socialistic and purely Mexican in character. And in the 1946 presidential elections, it was the PRI candidate, Miguel Alemán, one-time Minister of the Interior, who was elected to succeed Ávila Camacho. But the revolution of which the Mexican people are so intensely and proudly conscious still has a long way to go. Even today, less than half of Mexico's peasants work their own land. Irrigation work increased throughout the war, but of the 22 million acres which could be made productive by irrigation, only 6 million have so far been reclaimed. Today, aware of the almost insoluble problems in a purely agrarian economy, Mexico's leaders are seeking to open up a broader avenue for development, in industry. As a labor pool, there are thousands of Mexicans once bound to the land who are now free to turn to industry for a better living. But the first requisite of an industrial nation is an educated populace. And today, all of Mexico is driving ahead on a vast campaign against illiteracy. Under the leadership of the Ministry of Education, the government has set out to teach reading and writing to every man, woman, and child in a population which, a few years ago, was nearly 60% illiterate. 20 million new readers and copybooks in Spanish have been printed by the government and are being distributed throughout every state. Books of all kinds are being made available to the public in huge quantities and in low-priced editions. For lack of enough schools and teachers to do the job, the government has decreed that every literate citizen of Mexico, under penalty of the law, must teach at least one other person to read and write, or must contribute financially to the program. And this law is enforced. But But because the future of Mexico lies less with the old than with the generation rising, it is on the education of the young that the Mexican government is concentrating its strongest efforts. To place education within the reach of all, new schools are opening up as fast as funds become available to build them. Grade schools, technical schools, colleges, where youngsters may learn how to transform the Mexico of the past into the better Mexico of tomorrow. And in the progress of Mexico's efforts to strike the bonds of ignorance from a whole people, there lies the strongest hope that Mexico's revolution will, in time, achieve its goal: democracy, self-respect, and well-being for all.